Ilya's ward did not like being watched. He had always preferred the quiet of machinery to the chatter of people, and on the orbital research station Oralia, the hum of engines and the occasional spark of failing circuitry were companions he could trust. Today, however, he found himself muttering again, pacing back and forth in the narrow maintenance corridor as he tried to figure out why a translation node had stopped responding. "Come on, you piece of junk," he whispered to himself, fingers tracing the cool metal surface of the console. "Not now. Why do things always fail when someone important might show up? Couldn't it just wait a few hours?" He kicked lightly at the panel, but it didn't respond. Figures, just like the coffee machine, never works when you need it. Most other species were taller, wider, or had limbs that bent in ways humans had never imagined. Humans were quiet, observant, adaptable, and often ignored. "You're talking to yourself again," said a soft, melodic voice. Elias froze. He turned slowly and saw a young alien girl standing there. Her skin shimmered in faint hues of blue and violet, reflecting the light from the panels above. Her eyes were large and slightly tilted, glimmering with a curious intelligence. She looked harmless, almost delicate, but the sharpness in her gaze told him she understood more than she let on. I was," he began, but she held up a hand, smiling. "I heard everything," she said simply. "Every word." He had muttered a lot, complaints about machinery, sarcastic remarks about the station's safety protocols, even a joke about the chief engineer's obsession with order. "You understood all of that?" he asked. She nodded. "Every word and more. I know what you meant, even the parts you thought you hid from yourself." "Because humans are supposed to be the secretive ones, huh? Guess I've been exposed." Elias shook it cautiously, noticing the strange warmth of her touch, a subtle pulse of energy that seemed to resonate in his palm. "Elias, ward, human technician," he replied. You don't normally understand us, right? Humans. You think aloud, even when you do not intend to. Your minds leak. It is why you survive situations others fail at. You argue with yourself, you test ideas aloud, you improvise constantly. I have never seen anything like it. I am curious. I have studied your species for months, and yet I never expected this. Your muttering, it is extraordinary. Your muttering aligned with a problem I had been trying to solve. It helped me understand the system faster than I ever expected. Elias laughed outright this time, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. They worked together for a few minutes in silence. Elias adjusted wires and panels while Salith observed, occasionally pointing out details he had missed. It was not that she needed help. Her species had advanced senses and mental faculties, but something about his approach, the way he reasoned aloud, seemed to complement her observations. You humans, she said finally, you are unpredictable and yet there is order in it. You test possibilities in real time. Other species try to hide uncertainty. You embrace it. It's mostly survival, I guess. If I don't mutter and test things out, I'll make a mistake. Better to argue with myself than blow up a node or worse, the whole station. You do not hide your thoughts, yet they are your greatest strength. They were survival tools, the way humans thrived in situations that would confuse or overwhelm others. Why me? He asked. Why not someone else? Humans are underestimated. That is why you survive. But those who fear what they do not understand may try to control you. Think aloud, test your ideas, argue with yourself, but be aware someone is always listening. Some will admire it, some will want to exploit it. The translation node he had been working on emitted a high-pitched warning, lights flashing across the corridor. Elias cursed under his breath and rushed forward, tools in hand, muttering as he went. Of course, just when things are quiet, chaos strikes. Why does it always happen now? Each muttered word, each fragment of thought was a thread she could follow. It was like watching a river twist and turn, chaotic yet purposeful. For the first time, Elias realized that being human, the way he thought, the way he processed the world aloud, was something unique, something that could not be replicated or fully understood by anyone else. And for some reason, that realization both terrified him and filled him with a strange sense of pride. He knelt before the failing node, muttering possible fixes aloud, trying one solution after another. The other species on the station might have waited for orders, relying on rigid protocols. Elias relied on instinct and mental dialogue, testing every path, discarding mistakes in seconds. Salith watched, silently noting every pattern, every decision process. Finally, with a click and a soft whirring, the node hummed to life. Lights steadied and alarms ceased. Elias leaned back, exhausted, and muttered, Well, that's one crisis avoided, for now. It saved time, effort, and perhaps reputation. By the time the station entered quiet mode that evening, Elias had grown used to her presence. He realized that his human habit, his tendency to speak his mind aloud, was not just a quirk, it was a gift. In a universe that valued calculation, control, and silence, humans could think where others froze, adapt where others faltered, and survive where others failed. Salith smiled once more, her eyes reflecting the soft glow of the station lights. "You have no idea how important this is," she said softly. Elias laughed, shaking his head. "I just fix broken things, that's all." The next morning, Elias woke before the station's artificial sun fully lit the corridors. He stretched, rubbing the sleep from his eyes, and muttered under his breath about the inefficiency of the food dispensers. It was a habit, a small way to process the day ahead. The corridor was empty, except for the soft hum of the station and the occasional flicker of light on the metal walls. "You're awake early," said a familiar voice. Elias turned. Salith stood at the doorway, her eyes glimmering with the quiet curiosity he had come to expect. "You heard me?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "Of course," she said, smiling. "It is hard not to. I swear I can't even think without someone knowing it now. When humans think aloud, they influence them. All I do is mutter complaints and ideas while fixing machines. How can that possibly tip anything? Humans test reality in real time. It is exactly what you do that makes it special. Survival is intelligence, improvisation is power, and humans excel at both." The morning passed quickly as they walked through the station, checking nodes and systems. Elias muttered constantly, talking himself through problems, making jokes about the strange alien designs, and questioning protocols that made no sense. Salith followed silently, listening. Occasionally, she would point out a small detail he had overlooked, her voice calm and precise. By midday, word of their unusual cooperation had spread. Aliens stopped to watch them, some whispering in their own languages. It was not disrespect, Elias realized, but fascination. He muttered louder, sometimes forgetting he was being observed. Salith simply smiled, noting every pattern. During lunch, the station's communal area was buzzing with different species. Humans were still rare here, and Elias drew attention without trying. Salith sat beside him, watching the crowd with keen eyes. "See that group over there?" she asked, pointing subtly. "They are engineers from a species called the Rithari. Their thinking is strictly logical. They cannot handle improvisation." They were talking in rapid clicks and hums, moving their limbs in precise motions. He tried not to stare. "When a human speaks aloud, it disrupts their mental flow," Salith continued. "Even a few words, questions, suggestions, doubts, can make them pause, reconsider, sometimes even fail at tasks they usually master. So I'm dangerous, and some will try to control it. Aliens work together in teams, their movements coordinated and precise." Elias muttered continuously as he adjusted a failing power conduit, talking through every step, questioning possible fixes, imagining worst-case scenarios. Salith followed, noting every fragment of thought. Suddenly, alarms blared across the station. Lights flashed red, and an automated voice warned of a containment breach in one of the auxiliary energy cores. Elias cursed under his breath, pacing quickly toward the affected section. "Of course," he muttered. "Right when things were quiet, why does this always happen now? Nothing ever works the way it should." "Let your mind flow." The chaos in his mind spilled into the air, and Salith interpreted it for the alien engineers who had gathered. For the first time, Elias realized the effect of his words. The Rithari engineers froze initially, confused by his rapid-fire thoughts. But as Salith translated, guiding them to understand his reasoning, they began to adapt. What had been a rigid system of steps became a fluid collaboration. Humans and aliens worked together, guided by his muttering, solving problems in ways no one species could achieve alone. Minutes passed. Sweat ran down Elias' forehead as he adjusted panels, recalibrated conduits, and rerouted energy flows. His voice never stopped, muttering, joking, imagining failures, testing ideas aloud. Salith moved beside him, relaying his thought patterns, smoothing the chaos for those who could not follow unaided. Finally, with a loud click and a surge of light stabilizing, the containment breach was controlled. The alarms ceased, and the station's systems returned to normal. Elias leaned against a wall, breathing heavily, muttering one last sarcastic comment about how nothing ever worked properly. Salith smiled. "See, Your muttering saved more than the core. It saved time, effort, and perhaps even lives. You do not follow protocols blindly. You think aloud, improvise, test possibilities. You humans are unpredictable, and the universe favors those who can adapt. Their minds worked in ways that no one else could match, and their strength lay not in raw power, but in the ability to think, adapt, and survive. By evening, the station was calm again. The other species whispered among themselves about the events of the day. Some were fascinated, some were wary. Elias sat with Salith, cleaning his tools in silence. You know, he said finally, I always thought humans were small, quiet, easily ignored. But maybe we're not. Maybe we're different. Humans cannot hide who they are. You think aloud. You test reality. That is strength. And strength makes others uncomfortable. Salith placed a hand on his shoulder. You have no idea how far this will reach. But for now, you have learned one thing. Your voice, your mind matters. Even when you do not realize it. News of yesterday's containment crisis had spread quickly, and many species aboard Orlaia were still talking about the human who had muttered his way to saving the station. Elias had tried to ignore the whispers, but it was impossible. Everywhere he went, eyes followed him. Some were curious, others cautious. Salith found him first, standing near a junction where the station's corridors branched in every direction. You're needed, she said. The council wants to speak with you. They want to understand what humans can do. The council chamber was vast, circular, and suspended in zero gravity, allowing members from dozens of species to sit comfortably in positions that suited their bodies. Elias' human form looked small among them, but he refused to shrink back. He muttered quietly to himself as he stepped forward, running through possibilities, risks, and mistakes he might make. Elias Ward, said a deep, resonant voice from the far side of the chamber. A Rathari elder, its limbs clicking with precision, leaned forward. We have heard of your actions during the containment breach. Explain your method. Speak truthfully. They will listen to the process, not just words. Elias realized that they were not only listening to his words, they were trying to trace the flow of his thoughts, which was something few species had the ability to do. And the result, another council member said, a tall, luminous being with translucent skin, was that the station was saved. No one was harmed. They explore the problem from many angles at once. Their thought patterns are flexible. That is their strength. It was revolutionary. One member, a scholar from the crystalline Voran species, leaned forward, its facets reflecting light in sharp angles. You propose that a human's spontaneous mental flow can outperform structured logic. Others worried. Elias could feel the tension in the room, the fear of something they could not predict. Salith stepped closer, speaking in a clear, calm voice. Your species underestimates humans because you do not understand them. They think differently. Their minds broadcast possibilities openly, testing reality in ways no algorithm or rigid system can match. That unpredictability is remarkable. Control is necessary. To learn from, to adapt, and to overcome situations where other species falter. But when it does, it's powerful. And yet here in the presence of the council, he could feel the weight of their curiosity and fear. I don't know, he admitted, but humans survive because we think, we question, we test, that's all. You adapt where others fail. Perhaps there is merit in observing and learning from this method of thinking aloud. Further study is warranted. He leaned against a railing, muttering softly about how exhausting the meeting had been, how aliens never understood sarcasm, and how he just wanted a quiet corner to fix some nodes. You did well, Salith said. You explained without exaggeration, without pretending to be something you are not. That is rare. That is human strength. I'm just me. Their minds, their way of thinking, were being noticed, studied, and perhaps feared. By evening, Elias returned to his maintenance duties. He muttered continuously, testing each system, thinking aloud as always. Engineers from other species occasionally approached, hesitant but willing to listen. Salith followed, translating his thought processes, showing how human improvisation could solve problems that rigid procedures could not. It became clear that yesterday's containment breach was only the beginning. The station's leadership started to consider humans in a new light, not as quiet technicians, but as living problem-solving engines. Elias could see the potential, and yet he could not fully understand it himself. He simply did what humans had always done: think, question, improvise, and survive. Later, in the quiet of his quarters, Elias stared out at the stars, muttering softly about how strange it felt to be so noticed. Salith's words echoed in his mind. Humans broadcast their thoughts. Humans test reality. Humans survive because they do not hide. And now those traits were no longer private. But he felt a strange pride in that. For the first time, he realized that being human, messy, unpredictable, loud in thought was not a flaw. It was a power. And perhaps the galaxy was beginning to understand that, one muttered word at a time. And somewhere, deep in the council chambers and across the station, other species were listening, trying to learn, trying to understand, trying not to fear the human who simply thought aloud. Elias muttered again, softly, almost to himself. Well, if thinking out loud is dangerous, I guess I'm one of the most dangerous humans alive. And that is why you are necessary. And in a universe where survival often depended on prediction and control, humans, the ones who could not stop muttering to themselves, were quietly becoming unstoppable. Elias woke to the familiar hum of the station, but today it felt different. There was an undercurrent of tension, subtle but impossible to ignore. News of his council meeting had spread further than he expected. Some species were impressed, others cautious, and a few wary. Even in the corridors, whispers followed him, curious eyes tracking every movement. He muttered softly under his breath, not out of habit this time, but to steady himself. Of course, he said, pacing in front of the maintenance bay, this is exactly what I needed, attention. Just what a human technician dreams of. I just fixed a problem. That is invaluable. Aliens gathered around, hesitant at first. Most species could not follow his erratic thought patterns, but Salith translated, not words but process. She explained his reasoning, his testing, and his improvisation. Slowly, the engineers began to act, applying his ideas in ways their rigid protocols had never allowed. By midday, the small fluctuations had been stabilized, and Elias stepped back, muttering to himself about the efficiency of alien machinery. He noticed the council's representatives watching from above, their eyes wide with interest. He realized that his quiet habit, muttering, was now under scrutiny at the highest levels. Do you understand what this means? Salith asked softly, her eyes following his movements. He shook his head. I fix things, that's it. Why does it matter? That is influence. If it collided with the station, the damage could be catastrophic. Elias muttered immediately, walking briskly toward the docking control. He ran simulations aloud, testing trajectories, predicting outcomes, questioning assumptions, and discarding ideas that would fail. Salith followed, translating his mental process for the control teams. Engineers and pilots who had previously relied on rigid calculations now improvised based on Elias' muttered instructions. They adjusted thrusters, stabilized orientation, and prevented the collision. The cargo vessel docked safely, and the crisis was averted. Elias leaned against a console, breathing heavily. I swear I'm just muttering and hoping it works. Somehow it does. His thoughts were interrupted by a soft chime. Salith appeared in the doorway, her expression thoughtful. There is more, she said. The council is discussing broader implications. They want to know if humans can participate in strategic planning for interspecies operations. Your thinking could guide more than just repairs or docking procedures. Strategic planning, me? I'm a technician, not a strategist. Your unpredictability, your reasoning, your improvisation, they cannot be taught, but they can guide others. Elias continued his maintenance duties, but now he was accompanied by small teams of alien engineers. They observed his every step, mimicking his muttering, his way of testing possibilities aloud. Salith moved among them, explaining nuances, ensuring they understood the reasoning behind his words. Elias noticed something remarkable. Problems that had taken hours or even days to resolve were now being solved in minutes. The alien engineers were adapting, thinking in ways they had never considered. And he realized that his human habit, once quiet, unnoticed, and sometimes frustrating, was teaching others how to think differently. It was not without tension. Some species grew wary of the human who could influence so many. There were whispers about control, manipulation, and unpredictability. Elias muttered quietly, half to himself, about how creatures fear what they cannot predict. Salith listened. Understanding the subtext, he barely noticed himself. One evening, during a council briefing, a representative from the Rathari faction spoke. This human, his thinking is influential. We cannot ignore it. But can we trust unpredictability? Elias muttered continuously, walking among them, articulating possibilities, challenges, and potential outcomes. He did not lead in the traditional sense. He did not command. He simply thought aloud, exploring every angle, and the council listened, not just to his words, but to his reasoning, his method, his human way of approaching chaos. By the end of the session, a decision had been made. Humans would be formally included in strategic planning and operations across the station. Not as leaders, not as commanders, but as living examples of adaptive thinking. Their minds would be studied, their methods documented, and their muttering respected. Elias exhaled, muttering softly, "I didn't even ask for this." And that is why you are effective. Engineers tested multiple approaches rather than following one strict protocol. Problems were solved faster with less strain on resources. Humans had always been rare, quiet passengers on this station, but now their way of thinking was making a visible difference. Elias realized that simply being human, thinking aloud, testing, improvising, was influencing not just machinery, but minds. Salith appeared beside him one evening as he stared out the observation window, the stars stretching endlessly into the void. "You see what is happening?" she asked. Elias nodded slowly. "I think so. It's strange. I don't even feel like I'm leading anyone. I'm just muttering like always." With the human way of thinking, it is subtle but powerful. I guess that's better than dangerous. And now on this station, that same trait was spreading, teaching others to adapt, improvise, and survive in ways they had never considered. As night fell over the station, Elias continued his muttering, tracing problems, imagining solutions, and speaking aloud to himself. And somewhere across the corridors and docking bays, other species listened, learned, and began to understand the power of the human mind. Elias smiled faintly, muttering under his breath, "Well, if this is dangerous, maybe it's worth it." And it is only the beginning. The station hummed with quiet efficiency, but Elias could feel a new energy in the air. It was subtle yet undeniable, a current of expectation, curiosity, and cautious admiration. Humans had never been prominent on Oralia, often overlooked by taller, faster, or stronger species. Yet now, everywhere Elias went, there was attention. He muttered softly under his breath as he walked through the maintenance corridors, testing equipment, noting minor fluctuations, and imagining worst-case scenarios. "Even your quiet muttering has consequences," Salith said, appearing beside him. "The Council has received reports. Other stations are watching. The galaxy is beginning to notice humans. Other species are beginning to see it, understand it, and perhaps fear it." An unmapped asteroid cluster was on a collision course with a nearby trade route, threatening several stations and freighters. Automatic systems were trying to reroute traffic, but they lacked the flexibility to anticipate every variable. Elias muttered immediately, pacing before the console. "Of course," he said. "Why does chaos always come when the universe decides it needs excitement? Let's see speed, mass, trajectories. No, that's too simple, maybe if we adjust the auxiliary nodes." He tested trajectory after trajectory, considering fuel limits, gravitational pulls, and the unpredictable nature of the asteroid cluster. His muttering became a rhythm, chaotic yet purposeful, bouncing between technical calculations, human intuition, and humor to relieve tension. "Adjust thrusters here, reduce grav modulation there," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "That's risky, but maybe risky is the only option. Okay, try this." Slowly they began to act, following his guidance, adapting their own decisions to match the humans' improvisation. Within minutes, the freighters were rerouted safely, the asteroid cluster's paths accounted for, and the stations were secure. Elias leaned back against a console, muttering quietly about how exhausting it was to solve problems before breakfast. Salith smiled. And yet it worked. Again, that is influence. Even alien administrators began consulting him, not because he commanded, but because his mind worked in ways theirs could not. He muttered constantly, sometimes complaining, sometimes joking, sometimes running through what-ifs in rapid succession. Each muttered word rippled through the station, guiding actions, shaping decisions, and fostering a new approach to problem-solving. Word of these successes spread. Other stations requested consultations with the human who muttered his way to solutions. Some were cautious, others were fascinated. Across communications channels, aliens debated. Humans were unpredictable, yes, but in ways that produced results no algorithm or structured protocol could replicate. Elias found himself in front of a new council meeting. This time he was not called as a witness, but as an advisor. The council chambers were filled with species from across several systems. They discussed trade, exploration, and conflict management, issues far beyond the scope of any one station. Elias muttered softly as he stepped forward, running through scenarios aloud, questioning assumptions and offering possibilities. Salith stood at his side, interpreting not the words, but the logic, the reasoning, and the patterns behind them. The council listened. Some species struggled at first to follow the humans' chaotic approach, but gradually they began to understand. The improvisation, the testing, the questioning, it was not disorganized, it was strategic, and it worked. By the end of the session, a decision had been reached. Humans would be included in interstellar planning and operations, not as leaders, but as catalysts of thought, examples of adaptive reasoning. The council recognized that human unpredictability, often underestimated, could guide complex systems in ways no other species could. Elias muttered softly, almost in disbelief. Me, a catalyst for interstellar strategy. I still can't believe this. But now they were not just curious whispers. They were cautious respect, admiration, and recognition of something humans had always possessed but few had understood: the ability to adapt, improvise, and survive where others failed. In the following weeks, the station ran more smoothly than ever. Problems that would have taken hours or days to solve were handled in minutes. Aliens adopted human-style reasoning alongside their structured methods. Elias muttered constantly, sometimes to himself, sometimes to the teams around him, and each word had weight. Each muttered sentence shaped decisions, guided actions, and demonstrated the value of the human mind. One evening, Elias stood at the observation deck, gazing at the endless expanse of stars. Salith joined him, silent at first, then spoke softly. You see, Elias, your muttering has done more than fix machines or guide engineers. It has changed minds. It has shown the galaxy that humans are unique. That survival depends not just on strength or speed, but on thought, curiosity, and adaptability. That is why you matter. Elias muttered softly, almost to himself. I guess humans really are something else. Alien engineers, pilots, and administrators had learned to adapt alongside him, and humanity's reputation had begun to spread across the systems. Humans were no longer quiet passengers. They were thinkers, innovators, and catalysts. Their unpredictability, once a small curiosity, had become a recognized strength. Elias realized that the greatest power humans possessed was not physical strength, nor technology, nor command. It was their mind. The ability to think, to test, to adapt, and yes, to mutter aloud when faced with uncertainty. That simple habit, once overlooked, had changed outcomes, saved lives, and reshaped perspectives. He muttered softly, a faint smile on his face. Maybe muttering really is dangerous, but in a good way. To those who embrace it, it is power. And somewhere far beyond Orlaia, other species were beginning to notice, to learn, and to respect what humans could do. Elias muttered softly one last time that night, a private confession to himself. We're just human, and that's enough.